The Reformation in England. The Reformation, one of the most important events in the history of the world, took place in the 16th century. It was called the Reformation. There had long been growing up in Germany and France, as well as in England, a feeling that the church was in urgent need of reform. The clergy extorted high fees for performing the sacraments and for cases in the church courts. Some of them undertook for the sheikh of stipends more duties than they could possibly fulfill. Moreover, since national feeling was becoming the ruling passion, people resented sending large sums of money out of the country as tribute to the Pope. Again, too many of the higher clergy were more concerned with politics than with religion. Altogether, it seemed that the sacred origin and purpose of the church was being pushed into the background by worldly aims and interests. Wycliffe had protested against all these in the 14th century, but his Lollard movement had little permanent effect. In the reign of Henry VII, the Oxford reformers Colet, Erasmus, and More had endeavored by written and spoken words to induce churchmen to mend their ways, but in vain. Something more drastic was needed, and that something now appeared in Germany. One of the detestable practice of the church was the sale of the intelligence. Whenever the popes were in special need of funds, they issued documents which excused the purchases from penance. In 1517, Pope Leo X, in order to raise money for the building of St. Peter's in Rome, organized a special sale of these indulgences, and a Dominican friar named Tetzel was particularly active in selling them. He visited the university town of Wittenberg. The professor of theology there was a monk named Martin Luther. He had long felt how much harm these practices were doing to the cause of religion, and he nailed on the door of the church theses, written arguments, proving that the selling of indulgences was a fraud. A vigorous and excited discussion arose all over Germany. Luther was drawn into arguments in the courts, of which he denied many of the essential doctrines of the Catholic Church, including transubstantiation and the celibacy of the clergy. The Pope excommunicated him, but he flouted the papal authority by publicly burning the bill of excommunication outside the gates of Wittenberg. At the desire of the Pope, the newly elected Emperor Charles V summoned Luther to appear before the Diet, assembly of German princes, at Worms. The bold monk appeared but refused to withdraw any of his attacks on Catholic doctrines. Some of the princes were for having him burnt as a heretic, but others were on his side, and so many of the German people already looked upon him as a national hero that it was impossible for the imperial government to take any active steps against him. The supporters of Luther were called Protestants because they were protesting at what was wrong with the Catholic Church. The English people were only mildly interested in the controversy, much as they might dislike certain of the practices of priests and monks. They did not want to break with the church altogether. As for King Henry VIII, he was so staunchly Catholic that he wrote a theological treatise defending the papacy against Luther's arguments, and the Pope rewarded him by conferring on him the title Fidel Defensor, Defender of the Faith, still borne by the English sovereign. Although Henry opposed the Protestants, it was partly because of him that the Reformation reached England. Henry had married his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish princess. They had a daughter, Mary. Henry wanted a son to succeed him. It was at the time when he was thinking of the need for another wife that he fell in love with Anne Boleyn, a young lady of the royal court. Henry decided to divorce Catherine and marry Anne. This proved to be very difficult because the Catholic Church rarely allowed divorces. The Pope was in a very awkward position when he was asked for to grant Henry a divorce, for he could neither annoy Henry nor the King of Spain, who was a relative of Catherine of Aragon. The Pope played for time, and Henry was ultimately annoyed. At the insistence of his minister, Thomas Cromwell, he proclaimed himself the head of the church in England. Thus, he no longer needed the Pope's permission for his divorce, and Henry married Anne Boleyn. Gradually, the Reformation spread all over England.